Live from Washington, D.C., this is Balance of Power with Joe Mathieu and Kailey Leinz.
There are no negotiations planned for today. Welcome to the Monday edition. As the latest attempt at talks with Iran appears to be falling apart, with President Trump now calling the regime unbelievably duplicitous, and CBS News reporting that there are no negotiations planned from this point. I'm Joe Mathieu alongside Kailey Leinz in Washington. Kailey, this comes after the president actually canceled attacks over the weekend, he says, at the request of Iran's neighbors.
Yeah, other Gulf states who didn't necessarily want to see an escalation that could have entailed attacking Iranian energy infrastructure. The president suggested it could have been the biggest U.S. attack seen since the likes of World War II, yet he called that off in the name of the pursuit of talks of diplomatic negotiations to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Right now, Iran is just saying they are talking about the Strait of Hormuz, but doing so with Oman, not the United States. And President Trump says whether Iran wants to admit it or not, we are, in fact, talking of a solution to a problem they've caused for decades.
Pretty interesting. The markets have been having a pretty good day, almost pretending to still key off the original word from over the weekend when the president climbed down from his threats against Iran. But we'll keep tabs on this. Things can change pretty quickly around here. And we'll spend some time with Michael Allen from Beacon Global Strategies to give us his sense on where we might be going next. Yeah,
whether or not we can get to a deal on that front. Meantime, there is a deal elsewhere on Capitol Hill, or between Capitol Hill and the Department of Justice. Is Todd Blanche, of course, the president's nominee to be Attorney General. Looks like he will be ultimately confirmed after reaching a deal with Senators Cornyn and Tillen, putting in writing that the anti-weaponization fund is rescinded, and clarifying some of that IRS immunity deal for President Trump as well.
President also apparently not the only one to be climbing down. The YOLO caucus is as well, and it looks like it's just a matter of when, not if, Todd Blanche will be our next Attorney General.
Yep, so we'll get into that with our political panel this hour. But we begin, as always, with a check on the markets. And for that, we turn to Charlie Pellet in New York. To Charlie.
Hi, thank you very much, Kailey and Joe. Bottom line here, we do have oil continuing to decline. Despite the headlines, we have got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ also holding on to gains. Yes, we're off session highs on the Dow at 52,963, have been trading briefly above 53K, but right now we're up 485 on the Dow, up 0.9%. S&P 500 index, I run the GIP screen on the Bloomberg, looking at an index that is very close to session highs right now, up 1.3%, and NASDAQ up by 2%, the NASDAQ 100 index up by 1.5%. So bottom line, equity market is hanging in there right now. The Bloomberg Mag 7 index up 3.9%. The SOX, the Philadelphia Stock Exchange Semiconductor Index, it remains higher, barely up 0.1%. The VIX below 16, and a 2-year currently yielding 4.25% with a 30-year 4.68%. The 30-year at 5.23%. It's the 10-year right now, 4.68%. Gold down $10 the ounce to $4,035, down 0.3%. West Texas Intermediate crude $79.83 a barrel, down 5.7%. Brent crude $83.76 a barrel, down by 4.7%. So bottom line here, we're keeping an eye on the headlines, but bottom line, oil does remain higher. U.S. stocks are higher. Joe and Kailey, that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you very much. WTI crude, as Charlie was talking about oil, is dropping below $80 a barrel once again today on hope of potentially diplomatic progress between the U.S. and Iran, or if not that, at least there was no escalation over the weekend and further attacks that the U.S. might have conducted on Iranian infrastructure, if not, according to President Trump, for the request of other Gulf states to hold off on that, as he described to reporters aboard Air Force One yesterday.
It was going to be an attack that would have been by far the biggest attack since World War II. When the Allies ask to call it off, you got to sort of say, well, let's see. And the reason they asked is I think there's a deal. We're talking to them in the form of a negotiation. It begins tomorrow afternoon, and we'll see if it's true. I'd love to do that.
Fast forward to this afternoon, and there are no negotiations. CBS News reporting as much, and the president's own posting on Truth Social would lead you to believe that as well. He doesn't say it outright, but the president, just a short time ago, writing Iranian leadership is unbelievably duplicitous, exclamation point. They ask for a meeting, he says. Some would say beg. Talks begin with more scheduled in the immediate future. And they say openly and proudly that they're not having any discussions and that nothing is being talked about. And they're only dealing with Oman. He goes on to say that Iran will never have a nuclear weapon, but it's difficult to tell exactly where we are between what we heard from the president over the weekend backing down from the strikes and what we heard from him ahead of the weekend, locked and loaded, and what was going to be the most punishing military attack, as he said, since World War II. Let's get into this with Jordan Fabian, our White House news editor here in Washington. Jordan, should we believe that this post is an indication that talks are off the table?
I wouldn't necessarily say that, Joe. I think the president has a huge credibility problem right now. He's gone through this cycle over and over again over the past few weeks, ever since the memorandum of understanding with Iran collapsed. And now he's effectively trapped in this cul-de-sac where he's driving around in circles, unable to find a solution or a way out. A negotiated agreement with Iran doesn't appear to work. As he said, they have also been unreliable negotiators in his view, but also climbing the escalation ladder is an unlikely prospect as well. It would anger regional allies, and it would further deplete U.S. weapons stocks. So he is trapped.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and as he noted that there were other Gulf states who were concerned about the kind of escalation that was being reported about, Jordan, it was also escalation that was set to include Israel, according to some of the reporting we saw. Where is Israel in all of this?
Whereas they were taking a front row seat with the U.S. early in the conflict, they seem to have taken a step back and are waiting for cues from the U.S. Because Trump has kind of been all over the place here, including a few weeks ago when he was angry at Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for carrying out military operations in Lebanon that he said was imperiling his negotiations with Iran. They've really taken a step back. And so right now, President Trump is kind of the primary actor here, but he hasn't settled on a course of action. And so that makes it very difficult for all the other countries involved to see where he's going to land.
Yeah, it's really amazing to consider the president getting a call from MBS to ask him to continue talking for fear of what this might turn into. How urgent is the concern, Jordan, in the region of this blowing up into a full-blown Middle Eastern war?
It's quite high, Joe. It's underscored by the MBS discussion. For him, their alternate route for oil shipments out of the region, the Red Sea, is imperiled by potentially the Houthis getting involved. There was some sign of that happening a couple weeks ago. They're obviously cut off through the Persian Gulf, so they don't want the other route to be cut off either. And not to mention the fact that a massive escalation by the U.S. would trigger retaliation by Iran. And despite the president's comments that they've degraded the Iranian military, they've still been able to hit targets throughout the region, including locations with U.S. troops. And so they know that a massive attack on Iran's power plants could trigger retaliation that could damage cities in Saudi Arabia, cities in the UAE and Qatar. And that's why you see these governments urging the president to stay at the table.
Yep, asked him to climb down, and climb down it seems he did, at least for now. We also saw something of a climb down from the DOJ, Jordan, Todd Blanche, putting it in writing at the request of Senators Tillis and Cornyn, who, of course, were holding up his confirmation process that the anti-weaponization fund created back in May is indeed dead, that order is rescinded, clarifying the details of this IRS audit immunity for the president as well. We know it got the thumbs up from Cornyn and Tillis. They're ready to vote yes for him in the Judiciary Committee tomorrow. Do we know how this is sitting with the president?
It's unclear right now, Kailey, and we've been asking the White House all day if the president signed off on this thing and haven't heard back. We're going to hear from the president, we think, in at least a half an hour here. So maybe we'll get some more answers, but it's unclear. He has the penchant to sort of weigh in at the last minute and derail deals. He was upset with Jeanne Pirro, the U.S. attorney for the District of Columbia, over the weekend for throwing out the prosecution over the reflecting pool, contradicting his narrative that it was vandals that damaged it. And so, possibly something he could say the same about this Blanche deal. It's possibly he says he'll live with it because he wants to see Todd Blanche become the permanent attorney general. So we'll have to wait and see what the president says here.
Indeed, we will. And of course, if the president takes questions from reporters during that executive order signing, we'll bring that to our audience live here on Bloomberg TV and radio. Jordan Fabian covering the White House for us. Thank you so much. And we want to focus back on what we were just discussing with Jordan, the conflict with Iran and talks, or the lack thereof, toward a potential resolution. As we bring in now Michael Allen of Beacon Global Strategies. He's also former special assistant to President George W. Bush in the national security sector. Michael, welcome back to Balance of Power. It's good to have you. As Joe has said repeatedly, the president says Iran is unbelievably duplicitous and is saying one thing privately and asking for talks, saying obviously another thing publicly today. What are we to believe?
Well, I don't know that we're directly talking to the Iranians. I have a feeling we're talking, of course, to all these different intermediaries. Oman is the one we're talking about today, but usually there's also Qatar and Pakistan that are in the mix. I think probably when these intermediaries come to us, they lean a little bit far forward to try and get us to either not attack or to embrace or to indicate openness to talking. And then they hope they can match that back with the other side. But in this case, I think things are not in a good place for us to be able to get together. And I think the president always wants to maintain maximum flexibility, so he's bobbing and weaving.
How many times does he get the bob and weave? You know, there were some groans last week. Like, okay, we're calling off. We're doing this again. The top of Drudge right now is the president holding up a taco. Markets, by the way, seem to be answering unlimited. Every time this happens, the market goes up. Then we're going to get upset and threaten to bomb. The markets will go down. But you know, guys, oil prices are still down 4 or 5% today. Does he get an unlimited card when it comes to this play?
It seems like it. I mean, it seems like he is only interested in messaging the oil markets or the markets writ large. He's got a strategic communications problem, I think, with the Iranians. I think it confuses them when we say they're dying to get together and bend. I think it's a big problem for us that we're sort of signaling that we're irresolute to others in the region. When we say anything other than we ought to be saying we've got all day. We're going to keep this blockade going. We're going to enforce the sanctions. We're going to try to get some ships through the Straits of Hormuz. But we can't stick to one coherent message for more than a day or two. So I think we've confused everyone in the region, the American people, and most interestingly here, our adversaries who aren't sure what to make of U.S. resolve.
Well, you just said we've got all day. Do we really? Can we maintain this posture indefinitely?
It's going to hurt readiness, and it would be expensive. But I would have said that 2 months ago, because if they believe that we're going to give up on the blockade again in 3 or 4 days, what do they care? And so I think that we have just signaled that we're flexible. And by the way, that's what the president, everything you read about the president, what he doesn't like his aides doing is locking him into positions. He's not like a typical politician that's worried about someone saying, well, you had a different opinion 3 days ago. What happened? He's like, I switched my position. So he always wants to maintain maximum flexibility. If someone's coming to him and saying, I think there's a diplomatic opening, he says, okay, well, let's go see what that is. And if it doesn't bear fruit, I think he indicates that he's ready to go back to war. It's confusing. We're whiplashing, of course. It gives us not a lot of confidence that we know how we're going to get out of this, but he's going to try every door and hope to find one that opens.
Michael, Iran's foreign ministry spokesman, Esmail Bagay, says not only are they close to finalizing a deal with Oman to reopen the strait, but the quote was, under no circumstance will the Strait of Hormuz return to the situation before the war. This is not the world as the president sees it.
It's not. I wonder at the end of the day, though. I mean, I kind of forecast in the medium term. We're already sort of grinding through this in an imperfect way. I wonder if the way out of this is going to be some modus vivendi, where we look the other way on certain payments. If you're going to use the Iranian side of the straits, we'll continue to say it's open. We'll do our best to attract people to the Omani route. But I don't necessarily see how you totally negate the Iranian role here if we're unwilling to forcibly reopen the straits. And that's apparently what Mohammed bin Salman and others are saying to the president. If you hit their energy infrastructure, or if you go too hard at them, we're the ones that are going to absorb the retaliation, but you'll feel the repercussions of the oil prices. And so I think every time Trump's reminded of that, he pulls back a little bit. So I bet there's some imperfect, sloppy understanding at the end of the day. Maybe we don't see some sort of formal written agreement, but some sort of arrangement.
Speaking of arrangements, the president announced last week an arrangement or an agreement made between Israel and Hamas, that Hamas was going to disarm and that Israel would eventually withdraw militarily from Gaza. It seems neither side, though, wants to do what they said they would before the other one moves first. What is the likelihood that this is going to be able to be executed in the way the president described?
Well, it's very low, and in this case, I think the president and his team deserve credit for trying. I mean, it looks good on paper when you read through the agreement. You think to yourself, wow, if this could work, this could be a breakthrough. But I think you can't help, given the history of this, but apply a healthy dose of skepticism. It doesn't seem like Hamas is going to really give up their weapons. It doesn't seem like the Israelis are going to gradually continue to pull back and lose their leverage over what's going on in Gaza. I don't want to totally rain on the parade. I hope it works. It reads good. It looks like we could try to do it, but I don't know. You're foolhardy to be too optimistic when it comes to Israel-Palestine.
Well, I mean, your opinions are being informed by history here. Remembering the president also said this war with Iran would be over in, 4 to 6 weeks?
Yeah.
Are you at the point now to believe, answer this as you will, but that all of this is unresolved on November 3rd?
I think it's very possible. I think we could be muddling through, continuing in these cycles where if the price of oil gets too high up, the president indicates he's ready to talk, prices go back down, the Iranians take a shot.
Getting whiplash here.
Yeah, well, then they're worried that too many, I mean, when this all broke out again 10 days ago or whatever it was because too many ships in the Iranian estimation were going through the Oman side of the Straits. And so they said, wait a second, are we losing leverage here? And then they took shots and then we went after them again. So I think you're going to continue to see the tit for tat, totally not very clear situation of what we're doing, muddling through. I can't foresee us going back almost even to an MOU, which was a mess in and of itself. And so I think they're going to be unstated understandings held with intermediaries in the medium term. But, don't look for some signing ceremony somewhere where we're going to get through this and have some kind of ironclad, clear document.
Well, we're wondering if there's going to be a signing ceremony that President Trump would partake in, signing off on a new sanctions bill that seems like the Senate could vote on this week before the recess, that would allow for the president to enact tariffs on buyers of Russian energy products, but also Iran now. And I wonder if you think for either of these conflicts that is going to be able to move the needle, assuming it can clear both chambers.
So I think it does help if the president wants to actually use them against Russia. If he wants to use them, he may think, well, I'm in a negotiation with them. I'm trying to induce them to come to the table. And so I don't want to use them. But maybe just the dangling them out there has some effect. So I'm glad they're seemingly on track to be able to pass. It's interesting that he wanted Iran added in there. I think it helps if he thinks that's a great tool for him to use sanctions-wise. It'd be wiser if we continue the blockade, because that's the real sanctions enforcement, not just chasing banks all over the world and blacklisting people. That's saying you're not coming through the Straits. So let's hope he uses this legislation for what it was intended, to increase his leverage over these adversaries.
Interesting. We only have 30 seconds left. Remember, you sat here for Operation Midnight Hammer. We talked about the walk up to that, and then, of course, what happened. Is Pickaxe Mountain next? Is that the next time we meet?
I think so, but I'm worried about whether we can. I don't know that there are ventilation shafts on Pickaxe Mountain that we can just send a Moab through. I think it's a different. It's hard to say without being briefed on the intelligence, but it doesn't feel like Fordow and Natanz.
Great to see you. Michael Allen with us. Beacon Global Strategies live in Washington. I'm Joe Mathieu alongside Kailey Leinz on Bloomberg.
It's 121 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We have got the S&P 500 index now trading at the best level of the session. The S&P back at 75.92, up 102 points now. That is a gain of 1.4%. Oil is declining. West Texas Intermediate crude down 5.5%, 80.01 a barrel on WTI. Barrel of Brent, 83.65. Brent crude now down by just about 4.9%. So bottom line here, stocks joining bonds higher, cooling tensions in the Middle East, spurring that drop in oil prices. Again, the S&P at 75.92, up by 1.4%. The Dow up 513 points. Dow Industrials up by 1%. NASDAQ up 537 for NASDAQ. That is a gain of 2.1%. The Bloomberg Mag 7 index up almost 4%. The SOX, the Philadelphia Stock Exchange Semiconductor Index, up 0.5%, and the VIX right around 15. The 10-year 4.2, the 2-year 4.25%, the 10-year 4.68%, and the 30-year 5.23%. Gold at $4,035 the ounce. Spot gold down 0.3%. West Texas Intermediate crude 80.03 a barrel, up now by just about 5.5%. So again, the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all advancing. Apollo Global Management has picked Austin, Texas as its second headquarters, joining a raft of other finance companies expanding in the Lone Star State to benefit from its business-friendly policies as well as access to local talent. Also, J.P. Morgan Chase vowing to funnel $750 billion into housing over the next decade, nearly 40% more than it has over the past 10 years, all part of CEO Jamie Dimon's push to invest more money in American communities. Recapping, S&P up by 1.4%. Joe and Kailey, that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you very much. And thank you all for listening or watching on Bloomberg Television and Radio today. You're going to want to listen and watch the rest of this hour and beyond, as we have an important conversation coming up shortly between Ed Ledlow and the CEO of Hugging Face, Clement Delangue, who, of course, is going to be talking about that inadvertent hack that OpenAI's model conducted last month as it was being tested. So stay tuned for that conversation. We're also expecting to hear shortly from President Trump as he signs an executive order pertaining to military families in the Oval Office, but is likely to take questions from reporters as well. We'll be bringing those to you live as we consider the path forward on Iran, and also look for the president's reaction to the deal that was struck between the DOJ and Senators John Cornyn and Thom Tillis. Of course, the two YOLO Republicans who were holding up the confirmation process of Todd Blanche to be the next attorney general. They wanted it in writing that the anti-weaponization fund would be dead. They wanted clarity around the IRS immunity for President Trump. And as of 11 p.m. last night, Joe, they got it, and they're prepared to vote yes on Blanche tomorrow morning in the Judiciary Committee. They
got it in writing. I'm looking at Todd Blanche's letter here, which is a couple of pages long and refers to some of the frivolous lawsuits in the language that the acting Attorney General used here. Challenging the fund. At least one court has declined to dismiss those claims as moot. What is important here, as he writes, no members were appointed, fund is not operative, no funds were transferred, no process for receiving claims established, no claims were paid. This order establishes beyond any doubt that there is no fund. That was enough for, to your point, the YOLO caucus to climb down.
Yep.
So he's as good as confirmed?
Seems so. At the very least, it seems he will be getting out of the Judiciary Committee come 9 a.m. roughly tomorrow morning.
Question is, can they do this on the floor of the Senate before everybody leaves town at the end of the week? That's a question that applies to a number of issues, including government funding, and it's where we start with our political panel. Bloomberg Politics contributors Jeanne, Zaino, and Rick Davis are back together once again. Jeanne is our Democratic analyst and democracy visiting fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Ash Center. Rick, our Republican strategist, partner at Stonecourt Capital. It's great to see both of you. Jeanne, should we assume that Todd Blanche will have the full job?
He likely will. I mean, he's certainly going to get out of committee, and then it's going to be a question of, do Republicans keep their caucus together on the floor? I do think he's going to get the job. I am not confident that Murkowski or Cassidy or Collins will vote against him. But he can't, they can't lose the two. So with Mitch McConnell out there, it's very tight in there. But I think one thing about this entire endeavor is it's a bit of a farce. This is an agreement between the federal government and Donald Trump. On page 4 of the agreement, it says that those parties are the ones who can change it. So the federal government has pulled out of it in the signing of Todd Blanche. But you know who hasn't pulled out of it? Donald Trump. And so I'm not confident that this thing is certainly dead. And of course, when we hear from Donald Trump, if he takes questions in a few minutes, he could also throw a monkey wrench into the proceedings as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's very true. He, of course, yesterday said that he wishes, or over the weekend said he wishes the anti-weaponization fund isn't dead, which Thom Tillis certainly took note of. So, Rick, I guess it becomes a question of whether you still think there could be disruptions in this process or its glide path from here.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure, based on what Jeanne was saying about, Murkowski and Cassie and some of these other people, that it's as smooth as you would think it would be. Certainly, I doubt if they would agree to a unanimous consent procedure to bring it up and skip a lot of time, which they don't have. Look, a lot of people don't like him as the future Attorney General because he supported the president's pardons against the most awful offenders of the law on January 6th. He has done his own version of retribution, going after people like Comey and Brennan. So there are a lot of Republicans beyond just this policy issue that has been negotiated who have a lot of anxiety about this individual. So separating, cutting a deal on a policy to get your way into a job versus being the right person for the job. And I think that's a really dangerous example to use in the future. I mean, if every single person who gets confirmed for Senate confirmation has to cut a deal on a policy issue, it could be total chaos when it comes to trying to get people approved. And I as much as I appreciate the fact that they did the right thing and got this deal on the anti-weaponization fund and the taxes issue, it's a really bad precedent. And so is he a guy, Todd Blanche, who you want to have as your Attorney General? And if not, you should vote against him. I mean, it's about him. It's not about the policies of this administration.
Well, it's a great point, Rick. I wonder if you believe that the president could impact the outcome of whatever confirmation vote is looming here based on what he is about to say or not say in the Oval Office. Every time he's had the opportunity, he has reignited the anti-weaponization fund.
Yeah, look, this president is hugely powerful when it comes to Capitol Hill. For a Republican in the Senate to defy him is an act of courage because the reaction is going to be intense. Just ask Senator Cassidy. But at the end of the day, yes, he could ignite this in the next hour. And all of a sudden, there's going to be a scramble for how do we actually get to these votes we need on the floor to confirm him. And so, yeah, I'm not sanguine about the fact that this is over yet.
Well, it may not be over. And as you were pointing to, Rick, they might need a time agreement if they want to try to get it done by the recess or just get to a vote, regardless of what way the vote goes. They have a lot they want to do this week before they're all supposed to fly out for a number of weeks, Jeanne, including a procedural vote this afternoon. 5:30 p.m. Eastern is when it's expected to try to advance a continuing resolution to keep the government funded beyond the end of the fiscal year. This one's a little longer than the House-backed CR before they left town. This one goes through December 11th. Democrats seem to be on board with this one. Is this what's going to avert a shutdown?
I don't know for sure if it averts a shutdown because, of course, even if it passes the Senate, it's got to go to the House when they come back from recess. And there's a lot in this thing that the House is going to object to. And, of course, there's a lot in it that the White House is going to object to. And that raises what has been another continuing sort of saga in Washington, which is the back and forth or the lack of communication, if you will, between John Thune and President Trump. There is no love lost there. Donald Trump is not happy with how John Thune is moving the Senate at this point. Certainly, he's not going with the getting rid of the filibuster, no SAVE Act. Reconciliation is put aside, trying to get this CR through, which limits the president's power in certain ways. So I think this is going to be an uphill battle. I do think there is an incentive with the election so soon after they get back to keeping the government running. I don't think it helps anybody to shut down the government. But I think this is going to be a family fight between Republicans if this thing passes the Senate when the House gets back and you get Donald Trump going back and forth with Thune. I mean, I'm really interested to see, does Donald Trump support somebody late in this year to challenge John Thune on the Senate floor, rather, for leadership? I think that's a real possibility here.
That would be something. We were talking to Nathan Dean a little bit earlier, Rick, the head of U.S. policy analysis at Bloomberg Intelligence, and he was highlighting this very issue. When everybody comes back from August, the push and pull between the House and Senate among Republicans could, in fact, lead to a government shutdown. Do you see that as a possibility?
Yeah, for sure. This has been a dysfunctional Congress since it began a year and a half ago. The closer you get to an election, the more you create independent actors who are acting in their own self-interest politically, right? Everyone's kind of been toeing the party line, and you still had a lot of disruptions. Can you imagine when everyone's acting in their own self-interest? So at the end of the day, yeah, I think you add an element of political manipulation into the Congress, and with only, 2 weeks basically of legislative time to get all this stuff done, it's you can't let anything go wrong. And I think the chance that a lot goes wrong is more standard with this Congress.
Well, I'd like to ask you about another matter, Rick, the Russia sanctions bill that has now turned into a Russia and Iran sanctions bill that would grant some more tariff authority back to the president against buyers of those countries' energy products. What do you expect the fate of it will be? Knowing it got 86 votes on the first procedural vote in the Senate, but it does give the president more tariff power. Is this something that's going to get all the way through to the president's desk?
Yeah, I think these sanctions are wildly popular. And I think that as long as the president doesn't abuse his authority in this new power that they're giving him to do secondary sanction tariffs on countries that are buying Russian and in future Iranian oil, I think that Republicans and Democrats together believe it's good policy and hope that the president doesn't abuse these powers.
Jeanne, do you agree with that?
I think it may pass, but I think this is a dangerous power to grant to this president in the hope he doesn't use it more full-throatedly than we would like. And I think that's a real possibility with him.
All right, Jeanne, Zaino, and Rick Davis, both of them Bloomberg Politics contributors. Thanks for joining us for an insightful conversation, as always, on Balance of Power. And we turn now to another very important conversation as we hand the reins over to Bloomberg Tech host Ed Ludlow, who is joined by the CEO of Hugging Face. Ed.
Yeah, thank you to the Balance of Power team. We are here because on July 22nd, OpenAI and Hugging Face disclosed that two powerful AI models went out of a sandboxed or closed testing environment, gained internet access, and then were able to hack Hugging Face's systems in what was seen at the time as a watershed moment in AI safety. And now an investigation has been in part concluded, and there's been time to assess what happened. Hugging Face CEO Clement Delangue is here to discuss exactly that. And I think, Clem, that's probably the best place to start. What happened?
A lot happens, right, in the past few weeks. We noticed, disclosed, as you mentioned, the first kind of like public instance of an autonomous AI cyber attack. We defended ourselves against it with an open model, interestingly, coming from China. And we learned that this came from OpenAI. Usually when you think about cyber attacks, you think about nation states, you think about hacker groups. You don't really think about one of the most prominent American AI company. And obviously, since then we learned that Anthropic was also facing some of the similar issues. So really, in unprecedented kind of like event happening here, new developments in the saga of AI.
We will discuss what has been highlighted by this, which is closed versus open debate, China's work on AI, America's response to this. But going back to the very basics, this was two powerful models from OpenAI, right? One released, one unreleased, but they had their guardrails lowered for the purposes of evaluation. OpenAI said to the models, they instructed the models, go out and do something. And I think it'd be useful to the audience for you to explain that part, whether the OpenAI models were just following instructions or if they were AIs that went rogue.
Yeah, I mean, I joked with the team a few days after it was announced that sometimes we ask agents to think outside of the box, but we don't want them to think outside of the sandbox in that case. I think it was a mix of kind of like, mistakes and kind of like the systems internally, I think weren't, good enough to prevent this to happen. After that, on our side, the attack was really interesting. Over 17,000 different actions taken over 4.5 days. So the speed and the volume of the actions taken were nowhere close to what like human cyber attacks could be. It wasn't particularly smart or sophisticated. It was more kind of like someone described it as a bear probing really everything in the system to try to find the honeypot in a way. But obviously, because it's an autonomous AI system, it does that pretty well.
After the disclosure on July 22nd, you got on an airplane and flew from Miami to San Francisco, in part to get with the OpenAI team and do this investigation. You just said that the systems were not in place to prevent this happening. Talk more about that. Prevent what happening? Where were the points of failure?
Well, I can't talk for them, but from what I've understood from what they released, and I think they're going to release more in the coming days, which I'm excited about. They had kind of like an evaluation sandbox, right, which was supposed to be like a contained environment for the AI models. And unfortunately, there were some weaknesses that led the agents to be able to get out of it, get access to internet, and decide to run a cyber attack against Hugging Face. So that's one first kind of like things that I think we can improve in the future. Now that we understand that these systems are capable of that. Obviously, I think that the monitoring part is important, right? Because the faster you can detect that, the better it is, right? We learned about some entropic instances that they haven't, seen or detected that happened 3 months ago or something like that.
Yes.
So obviously, we want to monitor these systems better. And then one last interesting thing, as I mentioned, we defended ourselves with an open model, right? And some of the guardrails prevented us from using frontier APIs to defend ourselves. So kind of like improving the tools for defenders, instead of obsessing about not giving them to attackers, I think would be a good thing in the future to make sure these incidents are not too harmful.
Okay, you've taken us there, so we'll go there. In this incident, it was two powerful but closed OpenAI models, where OpenAI lowered the guardrails in place to test their full cyber capabilities. They escaped the sandbox or testing environment, gained internet access, and were able to access your platforms mistakenly. You defended yourself using an open model, but it was a Chinese model. But the abilities of that model to defend you were also diminished by their guardrails. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I mean, the open model, fortunately, was kind of like flexible enough that we could use it to defend ourselves. So that's kind of like the kind of like efficient tools for defenders.
We're live on Bloomberg Television and Radio on Balance of Power. There'll be people in America and around the world listening to this and thinking, okay, very powerful AI models were able to escape a testing environment, access the internet, and then access mistakenly another company's platform. What was the net result? Did something bad happen as a result of this?
Well, I think not as bad as it could have been. It was bad for us, for our team, right? I mean, our whole security infra team worked on this for quite a while. It created some challenges for us, obviously, but it could have been way worse, right? Like for example, we're an AI platform, right? So we have kind of like good ways to defend ourselves, but a lot of other organizations, companies don't have kind of like the same defenses. Obviously, some domains are more at risks than others. So I think it could have been much worse, but we need to take this kind of like seriously as a wake-up call for us to kind of like work more on getting these systems secure and giving more tools to all defenders, and generally creating more transparency and more monitoring of these systems.
Has the US government taken this as a wake-up call? Which branches of government have reached out to you since the event was disclosed?
I'm not going to talk to kind of like more the private conversations that we've had, but we obviously reported that to kind of like the relevant authorities and have had kind of like a bunch of conversations with different organizations, different kind of like Congress members and people from government. I mean, there are a couple of things that I think we need to do and get right in the next few months. First, in my opinion, we have to make sure that cyber attacks, even when they're done by agents, stay a crime and illegal, and make sure to enforce that. Otherwise, we're going to end up in a world where everyone is cyber attacking everyone with really no disincentive to it. Second, we need to create more transparency. Like, for example, why not doing mandatory disclosure when agent cyber attack is happening? And third, we have to kind of like give more tools to defenders, right? Like we mentioned open models. These are kind of like some of the tools that cyber attack defenders need to make sure that they can defend themselves.
To recap, you're saying that the illegality of an AI agent, an AI agent carrying out a hack needs to be enforced, and basically broader regulations. The pathway to that is legislative, to your mind?
It's not really for me to say. Obviously, I'm not like a legal expert or policymaker. I think that's a topic that we need to think about. If you kind of like take kind of like higher view, we already have some autonomous systems in our lives, right? Like a self-driving car, and many others. We made sure there's kind of like liability, right? If you fall asleep at the wheel of your self-driving car, then you're responsible if you're hitting another car. In a similar way, we need to make sure that the legal framework for autonomous agents is clear and defines and useful for the field and the American society.
We're live on Bloomberg Television and Bloomberg Radio. This is Balance of Power, and we're speaking to Hugging Face CEO Clement Delangue, whose company disclosed on July 22nd that 2 powerful OpenAI models, without authorization or mistakenly accessed or breached his company's systems as part of a cyber evaluation that OpenAI was doing. Clem, timing is everything. Within days, some of the most important people in the world of technology came out with a letter backing America focusing on open models. I'm talking about Satya Nadella, Jensen Huang, more recently AWS CEO Matt Garman has joined many others. Do you think that the timing of that was a sort of catalyzed or a direct response to the July 22nd breach?
Well, I think it was related. This cyber attack showed that you can create risks with models behind closed doors that are unreleased. So just working on, preventing the models to be released is not the solution. And that, defenders need open models because, to defend yourself against your cyber attack, you need to run it on your own infrastructure because it's usually on your private data. And you need the control that open models gives you that sometimes proprietary APIs don't give you because of guardrails, because of limitations, because of also how much it costs, right? So I think that was a perfect example and perfect validation for this notion of the world's small companies, startups, researchers, but also large companies like needing open models wherever they come from.
I would just point out, Clem, that in the course of this conversation, we've talked a lot about it was OpenAI's models. You conducted a joint disclosure and then joint investigation with OpenAI, and of course, we've made every effort to invite OpenAI onto the network, onto the show, to discuss their side of the story and the investigation. But that open weighted letter in part was supposed to sort of outline the benefits of open models, the economic benefit, the business consideration. That is very much Hugging Face's realm, right? Hosts models big and small, open on its platform. The other thing was the concern that there would be over-regulation of open models by the US government. Kind of bring that full circle for us and why you think that concern is valid or not.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of different topics in AI, and I think the role of a lot of people is to set the priorities. And I think what this letter kind of like was outlining too is that probably one of the biggest risks in AI is concentration of power, right? Like it's concentration of powers, capabilities, wealth in a few organizations, when like everyone else would be kind of like lagging behind and be kind of like left out in a way, right? And open models are kind of like a counterforce to that, right? Like they empower small companies, startups, organizations that are not necessarily kind of like frontier AI labs to build AI themselves, to own their intelligence, as some people said. And I think that's one topic that policymakers need to focus on a little bit more than they've been focusing on so far. So hopefully this letter kind of like puts the topic more prominently on their desk.
After you and OpenAI made the disclosure on July 22nd that this had happened, I spoke to lots of your peers in industry, and there was also the kind of acceptance that this wasn't some major scandal. OpenAI has a lot of power. The closed models themselves are powerful, but generally speaking, industry said, we want to see the frontier labs doing this, doing these tests and evaluations of their capabilities, and then disclosing when something goes wrong. Just react to that, in that sentiment towards the events of that week.
I don't agree at all with that. Like we don't want any company in the US running cyber attacks against other companies. This is a crime. This is illegal for a good reason. Because if you create a world where everyone is allowed to run cyber attacks against everyone, we're in for a lot of trouble, right? You have to remember that in our society, most damages and most hurts isn't prevented because it is hard to do, right? Like if you think of it, I can go across the street and steal a grocery shop, and it's not that hard to do, right? It is prevented because this is immoral and this is illegal, right? So I don't do it because of that. And it's the same thing for cyber attacks, right? If we end up in a world where these are normalized, cyber attacks are normalized, I think we're gonna end up in a very dangerous world. The same way as I made the comparison with self-driving cars, right? We don't want to end up in a world where bumping into another car is normalized, is okay because you're driving a self-driving car. Like we want to make sure that our society stays kind of like healthy by keeping things that need to be, must be illegal.
This brings us back to the central concern of the American people, frankly, right? Which is OpenAI did not instruct those two models to go out and hack Hugging Face. They instructed the two models to undergo the evaluation, right? To do the test. They were able to escape the sandboxed environment, gain internet access, and they went to Hugging Face's platforms, in part, I understand, because the models determined they could find information on Hugging Face's platform that would help them to pass that test, carry out that evaluation. But OpenAI didn't instruct them to hack Hugging Face. Nevertheless, here we are. That's the bit that people are worried about.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the same way if I'm on my Tesla and I have self-driving and I fall asleep at the wheel, my intention is not to bump into another car, but you still have kind of like I think liability. I think they shared themselves that there was some kind of like mistakes that were done, that there was kind of like ways they could fix some of the bugs that led or some of the weaknesses in their systems that led the agentic system to be able to escape. And I think they're hopeful to actually fix this and make sure it doesn't happen again. I don't think they're going to try in the future to build a system that kind of like regularly runs cyber attacks against other companies. I think they're going to build systems that are kind of like stronger, better to make sure these things don't happen in the future.
Hugging Face CEO, Clement Delangue, we just have about 60 seconds left in the conversation. You've talked about what needs to happen, but what's the net result of all of this, and what needs to happen next?
Yeah, I think we need more transparency. I think it was a good wake-up call that preventing releases is not enough. I think we need more transparency on these systems. And second, we need to kind of like equip defenders better. Right, like for example, with open models that we used to defend ourselves. So we need more powerful open models for all defenders, so that we prepared for what's coming next.
Hugging Face CEO Clement Delangue joining us live on Balance of Power. Thank you very much, Joe, Kailey. I'll throw it back to you in DC.
Great. Ed Ludlow, thank you so much. Live from San Francisco, the host of Bloomberg Tech. Absolutely fascinating. One of the most important voices in tech of the last couple of weeks, taking a deep dive with Ed Ludlow, and still a lot to learn about what happened there, Kailey, with the hacking of Hugging Face by this model that broke out of the sandbox. Amazing to hear how calm he is talking about the whole thing.
Yep, just trying to explain how it happened, how it was inadvertent. We heard that Tesla metaphor about self-driving. Right. You don't necessarily mean to hit another car, but it was also interesting as we consider the legislative and regulatory path forward here on Balance of Power for him to say that, look, there are things that need to be done, although he wasn't willing to go so far as to say that these are things that needed to be codified via legislation, or what branch of government ultimately should be taking charge here.
On brand with the sweatshirt, Hugging Face CEO Clement Delangue. Kailey, the president is speaking. He's got an unrelated event happening in the Oval Office, but the war in Iran did come up here, as you might expect, saying that things are going very well so far. We'll have more on the president's climbing down from another threat to bomb Iran on the late edition of Balance of Power, 5 p.m. Eastern, right here on Bloomberg.